So our next presentation is going to be a function-based DataSplice configuration with Rick Crory. Rick is the co-founder and vice president of Crory and Associates Incorporated. He brings more than 35 years experience in asset and maintenance management and more than 23 years experience in the utility industries of energy, water, wastewater. Rick is also the founder and leader of the Northern California Maximo User Group, NorCalMUG, and is a member of the Association of Asset Management Professionals, AMP.
Awesome. Good day, everyone. So, been watching the presentation. Fascinating. The NIPA one was fascinating. And barcodes and tags are always good things to talk about. So, but my presentation is actually only one slide, and it's kind of going to take us down to more foundational type things that you're probably thinking about prior to rolling out Maximo and or DataSplice. Of course, it's heavily involves DataSplice, otherwise they wouldn't have invited me. So we'll talk about all that kind of stuff. So if you can see the screen, I got it kind of blown up. It's going to be the famous swim lane, which we'll go through. And it's, you know, how a work order flows through the business process, a work management process using status, which is typically how most people flow work through Maximo, is status-based. I'm going to slide down to the bottom here. So we'll kind of go through the legend. We're talking about PS as planner scheduler. A blue box means we're using Maximo as a tool. A yellow box means we're using DataSplice. And a yellow-blue box means the user could use either tool to perform what they need to do as far as that function in the business process. A white status box means it's a status within inside of a function, which we'll talk about when we get there. A little yellow box means it's a record set or a query, which would be either in Maximo or DataSplice, things that we use in start centers. A blue box is a status that moves us from one function in the business process to the next function. A triangle is a decision gate. This utility for work type only has 5. Corrective maintenance, which would be an unexpected failure of an asset. CP for a capital project. PM for preventive maintenance. Something that many organizations may not see, a PMR. So what a PMR is if I go out and I do an inspection and I find an issue, then the follow-up work order would be a PMR because I'm being preventative, I'm being proactive, not a CM to correct it. So that way when they're looking at what their PM-CM ratio is, those work, since it's proactive, go into the PM side of the bucket and not the CM side of the bucket. And then NM for non-maintenance. Non-maintenance would be this organization, this utility actually is in an area that gets snow. And so sometimes the drivers of the big vehicles, if it snows, they're getting pulled out to run snowplows. So that would be a non-maintenance type of work order where it keeps track of their time, but it's not really maintenance on their assets. They're moving the snow off the streets. And then they fully use, as I heard in the previous presentation, they use classifications for everything. So basically, they actually would classify that work order as not as snow plowing, but from a work type, it goes into the non-maintenance bucket. And then for priority, very simple, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 being an emergency. So a CM with a priority of 1 is an emergency work order, so they don't need to have a work type called emergency work order because that's what it is. It's a CM with an emergency status. So pretty straightforward legend and start to flow through the process. So this is a standard work management process, but everything is geared around what tools, what work type, and also what are we going to do to flow the work order from the time it's initiated to the time that it's closed. So if you look at the top, there's an initiation section. It's called WMO1. The Start Center actually says WMO1. And in DataSplice for initiation, you'd also would see any queries that supported this as WMO1. All training that is done is based on WMO1. So everything is really based on the business process. So it doesn't matter what your title is. You could be an admin assistant or you may be a mechanic. If you went into Maximo or into DataSplice and you could initiate either a service request or a work order depending on security, then you would see everything under initiation. The next part of the process, what they call WMO2, and this group is planning and scheduling. This is a mid-sized organization and a larger organization. These two may be split up. But in this organization, planning and scheduling functions are actually performed by a particular person that has those functions. Then there's the assignment of the work, WMO3. And a really small organization, planning, scheduling, and signing may actually all be being done by the same person or a certain group of people, depending on what they are. Then there's WMO4, which is performing. And then there's WMO5, which is closing. So if we start at the top, basically when you look at this swim lane, you'll notice it's not really based on an individual or role or anything. It's really based on what type of work am I doing and where am I in the process and what tool am I going to use. So in this case, the first swim lane is actually a PM. Their PMs all come out as priority 3. So one thing to learn from this utility is they're moving from Maximo from access-based systems that they've created. So since they were created specifically for this group, it's real user-friendly and it's easy to use. And so one of their priorities was when we moved to Maximo, because they've kind of outgrown these homegrown systems, they do want more capability, but user-friendliness was at the top of the priority list. They wanted something that was easy to use, simple, and their people could readily pick it up. So in their current system, they don't have things like statuses, they don't really have work types, and they don't really have status and work types or priorities. Basically, the managers there, the crew leads, and the supervisors kind of gave the work out as it came in, and a lot of this, again, as in many organizations, is all in someone's head. So part of this was trying to get what's in everybody's head into a system that would give them more capabilities. So for the PM, again, for this workflow, the PMs are going to get generated inside of Maximo. Most cases, they're going to be automatically generated. There may be some that are manual, so that's why it's auto or manual. Currently, in their existing system, everything is done manually. It doesn't really generate work orders. Somebody's going in and creating the work orders as needed. There's a start center for initiation. Then there's a start center for planning and scheduling. So if I have the capabilities to perform the functions that a planner scheduler would, I would have 2 tabs. I would have the initiation tab, which is what everybody has, and then I would have the second tab, which would be planning and scheduling. And then again, as I talked about earlier, this little document looking thing means there's result sets that are in their start center. That kind of shows, here's the work orders that have come in that are waiting to be planned. Here's what's scheduled, and they can track it inside the start center, the movement of the work. And again, it's a status-based workflow, so they can put things on hold based on waiting on plant condition or material hold. And also at this point, they could cancel it. Typically, they're not canceling a PM, which is not a good practice, but they could do it. They would set it to be approved, and then that would move it to the next function, which is assigning. So assigning is something they can use either DataSplice or they could use Maximo. So the planner scheduler that they have there also happens to be able to be perform the functions of a crew chief, which in their case is who's assigning the work. So he would probably stay inside of Maximo to do his assignment. But the others, which is the crew chief, he's actually out in the field. And again, this was all about ease of use. So to make it easy to use, they needed to have a system like DataSplice to make sure that they had what they could do out in the field. They could run disconnected. They could perform the functions that they need. So when they get to the signing role, we didn't want to have the crew chief going, bouncing back from Maximo and to DataSplice to do the work that he needs to do. So in this case, assigning is one of the things that can be done, and it looks very similar within the two systems. So if I'm in the field, I can do it, use DataSplice. If I'm back in the office, I could use Maximo. This also makes training easier. Again, when we do training, there'll be how do you do assignment. If you're doing it in Maximo, there'll be assignment and how you're doing it in DataSplice. So from assigning, then it goes to performing, which again, this is the field operation unit. They're actually going to be able to do water, wastewater, and water, because this group happens to do distribution. Later on, they're actually going to be moving to power, and so they also will get this tool. So basically, the majority of that work is being done inside of Maximo. What they can do here is they bring up DataSplice in the field, and again, their start center or when they bring up DataSplice and they're on the home page, they see performing and they see the same queries that they would see as if they were sitting in front of Maximo and seeing the start center there. So I see those work orders that are assigned to me. We also show work orders that are assigned to the individuals that are in their same group. So that way, if for some reason they're in the field and they get reassigned, those work orders are already there. They're not having to go look for them. We're using owner for those people that know Maximo. We're using the owner field for assignment. So if you're the owner, it's looking, am I the owner of this work order? And then when they're done with the work, they would just complete it, and then that would move it off once they sync off DataSplice into the person that's going to perform the closing function. So here's where things get really unique, and it's kind of cool. You saw some of this stuff, which I thought from the NIPR presentation, is what they're trying to do is set down a foundation here so that this business process works no matter, like I said, whether it's water, wastewater, stormwater, and when they get to the electrical side, whether it's power, they can kind of use this as a foundational thing. And the performing, this is where one of the reasons why they picked DataSplice was they wanted the form tool. This is utility, and since most of you guys are in utilities, there's lots of regulatory things, there's a lot of compliance things, there's a lot of things that need to be done depending on what state you're in, on rules that have to be followed when you're performing certain types of work. So even in this utility, one of the big things they do is what's called soil recovery. So in the old days, if they had to go dig up something and pull a pipe out of the ground, they would take all that soil, throw it in the back of a big dump truck, haul it down to the landfill and dump it there. And then when it was time to bury the pipe, they would just get new soil and they would bury that pipe back up. Well, they can't do that anymore. So now what they need to do is what they call soil recovery. So basically all that stuff goes into a dump truck, but then it goes to a site that the utility has where it gets filtered and separated. And that's a big checklist of things that they needed to have done. And so this is where the form tool that you saw earlier would come in. Basically what they're going to do is they would put a line in the job plan that would say that was needed for soil recovery, and then that's going to kick off the form tool to ask them the questions they need for the soil recovery, because they have to separate things like asphalt and dirt and other things, and at the end of every month they have to show how much materials didn't go to the landfill. At the end, there's going to be some stuff that goes to the landfill, but they're showing that they can do, they're using this tool to show where that soil recovery is, and they're using the form tool to make it user-friendly. So that way it's asking the guy a checklist of questions, and based on how he answers those questions, that's where they'll know what happened with that work order. They also have environmental requirements that they have to keep track. That has its own checklist. If that was a step in the job plan, that would also launch the form tool. And one reason why they're doing it this way is they didn't want to get to a point where they had 300 or 400 questions that someone was being asked, and I have to skip these 20, and I have to skip these 20, and so I'm rolling through 300 or 400 questions to get the job done. Basically, there will be separate checklists in the form tool that they would launch based on what's in the job plan. And so it puts a lot of work onto the planner scheduler, but they have planner schedulers, and they tend to really fully use the planner scheduler to do that. But what's nice about doing it this way, again, is it doesn't really change the foundation of how the work order flows, but what it does is if a new requirement comes in, then it's more of adding a step into the job plan. Say for some reason this job needed confined space or fall protection or some type of safety thing where, again, I have to have a checklist. You would add that into the job plan, and if we have a pre-made form for that already, that would just launch that form and ask the questions. As you plan the work, you can have a different script depending on what you're doing. So once that's done, it then turns around and it brings you back into Maximo where the work order is getting reviewed and closed. Obviously, if there's a follow-up work order, it can go down into the other workflows. And the other workflows are similar. I'm not going to drag you through all of them. This one's for a CM. This is one where the work order, so PM is a pre-planned job, so obviously they come out waiting to be scheduled because they're ready to go. A work order that's generated possibly in the field or somewhere else would be stop out as waiting to be approved. So then there's additional steps in this flow for it to get planned by the planner scheduler, but then once it gets past there, it kind of follows the same process. Again, we're using the tools here that we have at our disposal to make it easier. And again, as most of you know, when it comes to Maximo, customization is usually something you don't want to do unless you really need to. In my experience, there's many places that have customized Maximo, and they're still trying to do upgrades because their system is so customized. So in this case, they're able to take a tool like DataSplice and let it do some of the things that they need to do to meet their requirements without having to make a bunch of changes inside of Maximo, but then it also follows really Maximo out of the box. So then again, we're down to what they call a CM. In this case, it puts the work order in progress. And the way we're doing that actually in DataSplice is when you bring up the screen, if it's a PMR, they click on a button, it makes it a PMR work type. Again, because these guys aren't used to all these different, having to select a bunch of different work types, we're trying to keep it easy to use. It would make it a priority 3. There's a place where they go in there and they click and boom, it creates a CM, puts it in progress, and makes it a priority 1. Because in their case, a CM is something that failed. So 9 times out of 10, they're actually being dispatched, especially in this case, because you don't want wastewater, water, or stormwater going where it doesn't need to be. So typically, they're moving out into the field and taking care of the problem, and the work order is being done after the fact. So they would have DataSplice out there, boom, they could create the work order. They also have the map. They're using the mapping feature in DataSplice as well. So boom, they just click where they are, create the work order for them. CM puts it in progress. We have it set up to make it easier to add labor. And then in this case, since it's after, there's no planning or scheduling, it jumps right into performing. And so the only difference is down a little bit down the bottom is for service requests. They use service requests for many things. So when a service request comes in, they're not, in their case, they haven't really decided to manage service requests. So again, they're really coming in as requests for things, and then somebody's quickly making a decision, do I already have a work order for this, or something else that's performing this, or does this need to be a work order? and then they're kind of closing them out. They're not spending a bunch of time. It's pretty straightforward stuff. Like I said, it's foundational stuff. It's stuff usually you're going to do before you go out and implement, which is what this is. This is kind of the guideline that they use, and this is the plan for us to implement from.
All right, thank you, Rick.
No problem. You guys have a great day.